What is up guys, my name is Ignas, welcome back to the channel. Last time with the portfolio update we found out that it lacks some healthcare exposure. Currently I have allocated just over $2,000 to it. It is now 12.78% of the portfolio, and I have a target set for 14%. Now the week is also not great for tech stocks. It's coming closer to 18% of the portfolio, but this time we are focusing on healthcare. So right now I have 4 names from this sector in the portfolio: Thermo Fisher Scientific, Amgen, Merck and Medtronic. Today we are going to do a dividend stock comparison to determine which one of these should we be adding cash into. Though for the comparison I'm only picking 3 of these, and those will be Merck, Amgen and Medtronic. Now don't forget that an early thumbs up also goes a long way, and with that out there, let's get into the details for the comparison. So as mentioned, we are checking into 3 names: Merck ticker symbol MRK, Amgen AMGN and Medtronic MDT. For a dividend comparison, we'll do 8 different metrics. We'll check into how consistent is the quarterly revenue, price to earnings ratio history, number of shares outstanding, dividend yield, dividend payout ratio, years of consecutive dividend increases, 5-year compound annual dividend growth rate, and the dividend yield compared to its 5-year average. So each ticker will score points from 3 to 1, 3 being best and 1 worst, by comparing results on each metric, so best number gets 3 and worst 1. Then we'll sum those points up, and the ticker with the most points will be considered the winner of this free stock comparison, which we can then use to add new cash in, and thus increase our portfolio exposure in the healthcare sector. I hope that the idea is clear, so without dragging it further, let's begin. The first metric that we are taking a look into is the quarterly revenue history. So now we see last 5 years for Merck. There was a bit of a slowdown in 2020, with the lowest revenue in the quarter coming in at $36.49 billion, but afterwards that shot up, consistent increases for almost 2 years, and then there was one quarter in 2023, with a decrease of quarterly revenue by 8.89%. But afterwards again 6 quarters in the green, compared to what they brought a year before. So overall in 5 years we saw only 5 quarters that were in the negative year over year. Now let us take a look into revenue for Amgen. So it has been even more consistent, but revenue stopped growing by the end of 2022, with around $26.3 billion for the quarter. And we saw 3 negative quarters in a row with the largest drop of 2.13%. Though afterwards revenue jumped up to around 20% growth for the quarter year over year. I do have some doubts if this can continue, but still looking into the negative quarters, we do have 6 of them in the last 5 years. Now last one for revenue is Medtronic, and this is the most sideways action out of the 3. There was one large drop back in 2022, with a decrease on the year over year for the quarter at minus 26.38%, but then it quickly came back up to almost $8 billion for the quarter, and pretty much continued on this trajectory till today. So we could say there is some consistency, but for Medtronic we do see 8 negative quarters in the last 5 years. Now the second metric we are taking a look into is price to earnings. So again we start with Merck. From 2020 to 2022 the stock price didn't do much, though earnings per share have slightly increased. So we saw a PE ratio of under 15, then price surged in 2023 and earnings dropped down. In turn the PE ratio skyrocketed, but now again the stock price is going lower and PE is at around 20. So in line or just a bit higher than to what we would like to see over the last 5 years. Now switching to Amgen, and it is a bit similar but also different. So in the last 4 out of the 5 years there was some price action to the upside, and also earnings per share going up, so the PE ratio was under 20. Though by the end of 2023 and in the beginning of 2024, stock price surged up and earnings per share went down. So the PE peaked at around 53, though recently we are again going lower, and the stock is trading at a ratio of around 46, which is still way higher to what we have seen over the last 5 years. Last one, Medtronic. So here we have a similar peak that we saw with the other 2, Stock price is surging up and earnings per share is going down. The SPE ratio at over 40. But going further, it again normalized. In 2022, PE dropped to under 30 and stayed somewhere in line for the next 3 years. So currently the stock is trading at a ratio of 26.7, which is nowhere near the peaks of the last 5 years. Now let's take a look into the number of shares outstanding. So back in 2019 for Merck, that number was at 2.6 billion shares, and that was a 4% decrease from a previous year-over-year quarter. But it seems that there was a pause, and in the last 4 years they actually haven't decreased the number of shares out at all. So overall in 5 years Merck decreased the number of shares out by 31 million, which is then only a decrease of 1.2%. Now let us take a look into Amgen. So in 2019 there were 600 million shares out, and they were consistent for 3 more years, though in 2023 the decreasing stopped, and last 2 quarters there has been a slight increase, almost 1% up for the quarter year over year, where we now have it at 542 million shares out. So in 5 years Amgen decreased the number of shares by 60 million, which we can find is way better than Merck, decreasing the number of shares by almost 10%. And lastly, Medtronic. Again, we can find that it has a different graph. So in 2019, they had the shares out at 1.35 billion, and they didn't bother much for the next 4 years. But in 2022, it changed. They decreased the number on the latest quarter by 3.38%, and now we have the number at 1.29 billion shares. So we can calculate that there was a decrease of 64 million shares, which is in turn a decrease in the number of shares out by 4.7%. So we finished with 3 metrics, and now the remainder will focus on dividends. And this one is about the dividend yields. So Merck is currently paying $3.08 in dividends on an annual basis, and at a share price of $97.05 per share, we have a dividend yield of 3.16%. Next is Amgen. The dividend is $8 per share, but the price is way higher at $282.42, so the yield is really similar at 3.2%. And lastly, Medtronic. Dividend per share is $2.80, and then at a price of $83.66 per share, we have a dividend yield of 3.35%. So these are really small differences, and let's hope the remaining metrics will have more weight to it. Now next metric will be the dividend payout ratio. So what percentage of earnings company is using to pay dividends? For Merck, the payout ratio is at 32.73%. Now Amgen, and their dividend payout ratio is just a bit higher at 43.44%. And lastly Medtronic, again just a bit higher at 47.81%. Now let's take a look into the years of dividend increases. So for how many years in a row the company has been consistently increasing dividends? For Merck, that number is at 13 years. Switching to Amgen, it is exactly the same, 13 years of consecutive dividend increases. And then Medtronic, this is a very different story, with 48 years of consecutive dividend increases. Now for the next metric, I would like to take a look into the compound annual dividend growth rate, and we'll take a look into the 5-year number. So for Merck with 2025 estimate, the compound annual dividend growth rate is 4.43%. Then switching to Amgen, and dividend growth rate is a bit higher here at 7.06%. And then Medtronic, with 5-year compound dividend growth rate of 4.19%. So we went through 7 metrics, and now for the last one, we'll use a watch list of mine to check into each company's dividend yield history and how it compares to its 5-year average. So in the last 5 years, Merck was trading at an average dividend yield of 2.94%, and the stock now is trading at a yield of 3.14%. So it is a bit higher than average, plus 6.97%, not the best time that we saw over the last 5 years. For example, in 2024, the stock was trading at a yield of 3.56%, so higher than this average for 21.1%, but also just 2 quarters back, we saw a dividend yield of 2.36%, which is 19.74% below the 5-year average. So 6.73% doesn't seem like the worst time to get in. Now let's check Amgen. In 5 years on average it was trading at a dividend yield of 2.94%, and currently the stock is trading at 3.2%. So this seems a bit more consistent if we are not looking into 2020. Still, we had some peak last year in 2023 with a yield of 3.57% over this 5-year average for 21.48%. But again, we are now over average on yield and even higher than Merck for a few percent. And lastly, let us take a look into Medtronic. So on average in 5 years, the stock was trading at a dividend yield of 2.71%, and currently the stock is trading at 3.26%. So it is exactly 20% higher than we saw on average over the last 5 years. 2020 and 2021 was not that great, with the dividend yield maxing out at around 2.5%, and the lowest was by the end of 2021 with 1.84%, so below the current 5-year average minus 32.16%, but the last 2 years were comparatively good, with the dividend yield not going under 3%, and right now we do have it 20% over the 5-year average, way better than we saw previously with Merck and Amgen. So we managed to go through all those 8 metrics, and in the meantime I also filled the information in this table, so we are now ready to start assigning points. Again, best number in the metric gets 3 points and the worst 1. So for the first metric, Merck gets 3 points for the lowest number in negative revenue quarters. Price to earnings ratio, Merck again with 20.24. Number of shares out goes to Amgen, with decreasing the number of shares by 10% in the last 5 years. Dividend yield ratio goes to Medtronic, a small difference but still the highest at 3.35%. Dividend payout ratio is Merck, assigning 32.73% of earnings for dividends. Now the next one goes to Merck with 48 years of consecutive dividend increases. 5-year compound annual dividend growth rate. Amgen gets it with plus 7.06%. And the last one goes to Medtronic, where the current dividend yield is 20% higher than its 5-year average. So the points are in and we can see the results. Merck got 16, Amgen 17 and Medtronic 16. Surprisingly, only Amgen had the least best metrics at 2, and the other 2 shared 3 best metrics. But still it seems that Amgen was in second place the most, and with 17 points it is considered the winner of this dividend comparison. So now we do have a name, where we can park new cash with next month's edition, and thus increase exposure in the healthcare sector. And that was it for today. Don't forget to support the channel and leave a thumbs up under the video. What do you think? Is Amgen a good pick to be adding money into? Or is there something else that could be added instead? Leave a ticker symbol that you would pick in a comment below. Maybe then I can rethink this pick too. And so that was it from my side. Thank you for watching and I'll see you all in the next one.
Dividend dreams building